Hi everyone, welcome back. Second video of this unit. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the formation of solutions and what that includes. The first thing that we're going to talk about is solvation and hydration. Solvation is simply the interaction between solute and the solvent particles. Hydration is when the solvent is water. Solubility is what we're probably going to spend the most time talking about today. Solubility is the amount of solute that can be dissolved in a specific amount of solvent under the certain conditions. Solubility is dependent upon temperature and pressure. And remember, let's not forget the rules that we talked about yesterday where like dissolves like. Basically, polar dissolves polar molecules or ionic substances, and nonpolar will be soluble in nonpolar substances. We're actually going to go up in the notes today a little bit, and we're going to talk about what does it mean to be saturated, unsaturated, and supersaturated. When something is said to be saturated, it has the maximum amount of solute dissolved at a given temperature. When something is unsaturated, it has less than the amount of solute dissolved for a given solvent at a certain temperature, and when something is supersaturated, it has more solute that can be dissolved at a given amount for that temperature. When we start talking about saturated, unsaturated, and supersaturated, what we a lot of times will talk about is a solubility curve. When you look at a solubility curve, it should look something similar to this. Okay? If on this solubility curve, I'm looking at an element, and let's just say that we're going to look at, for example, KNO3. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to highlight KNO3 here. And what is actually on that line, or where that line is, we consider that saturated. So, for example, if I'm looking at a data point here, and let's just say I'm looking at this data point. So, if I have 100 grams of water at 30 degrees Celsius, I'm only going to be able to dissolve about 50 grams of KNO3 in 100 grams of water. Okay? Now, let's say that I dissolve 20 grams of KNO3 in 30 degrees Celsius in 100 grams of water. We would consider that unsaturated because it has less. So anytime I have a data point below that line, I'm going to consider it unsaturated. So for everything down here in purple, if I ever have a data point that lands in this purple section, that is going to be considered unsaturated. Now, let's also say, for example, that I have 110 grams dissolved at 30 degrees Celsius. We would call that supersaturated. Why do we call it supersaturated? Because at 30 degrees Celsius, the maximum amount of KNO3 that should be dissolved is actually only 50 grams. But yet when I take a look at it and I get it to dissolve, it's actually containing 110 grams. Okay? We would call that supersaturated. So anytime you have a data point above that line, it would be considered supersaturated. How do you make a supersaturated solution? Well, that's actually relatively easy. What you would have to do if I wanted to dissolve 110 grams of KNO3 at 30 degrees Celsius is I would have to figure out when will 110 grams dissolve, at what temperature. Well, 110 grams will dissolve at approximately 60 degrees Celsius. So what I would need to do is I would need to heat up my water to at least 60 degrees Celsius, dissolve the 110 grams, and then let it cool to 30 degrees Celsius. As long as it doesn't come out of solution, you would then have a supersaturated solution. Today's assignment is going to be added onto Schoology. Please take a look at it and answer the questions on solubility. Thanks.